tonight? Well, let's look at the test God gives. Here's God's self-authentication test. It's kind of like, when you buy batteries, you buy them in the pack and you can pinch them and this little thing lights up and you know there's juice in the batteries and they haven't been there for 5 years, and they're worthless. Well, God enclosed in the Bible a little strip you can test and authenticate. Prophecy is the little test strip to show who is God. And it says in Isaiah 41:21, present your case, says the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, says the King of Jacob. The only one, the only true God, he said, I am the one who can be tested. And the way he does that is, he says, trust the only God who accurately knows the future. Look at verse 23. You were looking at 21, look at 41:23. He says, now, if you want to prove your case, and if you want to bring forth your strong reasons, I'll bring forth mine first. Okay? Verse 23. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know you are gods. Yes, do good or evil, that we may be dismayed and see it together. If you back up to the end of verse 22, he says, and know the latter end of them. See, he's talking, what the whole context of this is about idols, and Israel's worshiping idols, and he said, if your idols are real gods, have them tell the future. He said, no one can tell the future but God. No one can tell the events in the future with detail and accuracy. In fact, God says, my prophecies are so accurate that if someone represents me and makes a prophecy and it doesn't come true, kill them. Whoa. Good thing we don't do that today, right? Because there's a lot of people who prophesy these vague things and a lot of them don't happen. And that is the test of Deuteronomy 18. You can look at it sometime. If someone comes representing God and saying, I am his prophet and speak for him, and they make a prophecy and it doesn't come true, they're a false prophet, God said. So he says, I'm the true God. Now, look at chapter 42. Prophecy not only is the test, prophecy in chapter 42 of Isaiah, verse 5, proves God is real. It says in verse 5 of Isaiah 42, thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens, who stretched them out, who spread forth the earth and that which comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it and spirit to those who walk in it. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I hold your hand. I will keep you and give you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the Gentiles, to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from the prison, who still sit in darkness in the prison house. Verse 8, I am the Lord, and that is my name, and my glory I will not give to another, nor my praise to carved images. See, the context is idolatry. Verse 9, here is how you can prove God is real. Behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. God says, idols can't do that. Only I can tell the future. Only I can tell you what's going to happen. Now keep going to chapter 46. 4 chapters over. Isaiah 46. Prophecy proves God is reliable. In verse 9 of 46, remember the former things, for I am God, there is no other. I am God, there is none like me. Verse 10, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand. If God says Israel is going to be a sovereign nation at the end of days, Israel will be a sovereign nation. If God says Israel is going to have Jerusalem and the nations of the world are going to conquer it and wrestle it away from them, Israel is going to have Jerusalem, the nation of Israel is going to have that city in spite of the United Nations, and the nations are going to wrestle it away from them, etc., etc. And if Jesus said there's a temple there, and Paul saw the same temple and said that there's this false God man that thinks he's God and makes himself like God standing in this temple, it's going to be there. Because look at what it says at the end of this. My counsel, verse 10, shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Now keep going to chapter 48 and look at verse 3. Prophecy is God's test. It proves he's real. It proves he's reliable. And prophecy reveals to us the God we can trust. And he says, I left prophecy for you because when you see the things I told you are going to happen, then as the world is so hard and life is so hard, you can be assured that everything else I told you is true. You can trust me. See, what's neat is prophecy is kind of like out there and it's just lying dormant. And it's just, most people don't even know what the prophecies of the Bible are. They've never spent time to study them. And those that have, they'll go, oh, look. Just what God said is happening. And that, he says, will prove that you can trust me. Verse 3, I have declared the former things from the beginning, Isaiah 48:3. They went forth from my mouth. I caused them to hear it. Suddenly I did them. Remember, the way God looks at prophecy is it's not a chart and it's not a set, for you to be entertained by. It's what he's doing. To us, prophecy is kind of fantastic, and it's like movies and it's books and it's exciting, and everyone's thinking about are the locust fighter bombers, and all this stuff. God says prophecy. Look what he says in verse 3. They went forth from my mouth. I caused them to hear it. Suddenly I did them, and they came to pass. Prophecy is God telling us what he is doing before he does it. God is bringing Iran against Israel. The Iranians basically, other than a few of those, mullahs, are pretty friendly, happy, nice people. I mean, they're just, they aren't horribly treacherous terrorists at heart, but boy, you get those mullahs telling them they get all these rewards and that Allah wants them to destroy and all this, and they'll do it. The people will. But it's not the mullahs. And it's not even the devil. It's God has put a hook, it says in Ezekiel. He's put a hook in them. And they are irresistibly being drawn into this. Now, it's all part of God's plan because he wants to show the world that he's God. And he says, I've picked one group of people, the smallest group of people, the Jewish people, and I've set them in the middle of the nations, and they're going to be my light, and I'm going to have the whole world come against them. And when the whole world is at its crescendo, I'm going to save them. And then you'll know who I am. That's the whole theme of the book of Ezekiel, by the way. He says that statement, and then you will know I'm the Lord, 62 times. Every time he talks about this judgment and all the evil that's going to happen to the nation of Israel, he says, but when I save them, you'll know I'm the Lord. Keep reading in verse 5. Even from the beginning I've declared it to you, Isaiah 48:5. Before it came to pass, I proclaimed it to you, lest you should say, my idol has done it, my carved image and molded image have commanded them. He says, no, I told you what was going to happen before it happened, so when it happened, you'd know who I am. So Bible prophecy is not something to be ignored, or even worse, to be downplayed by the church. God presents biblical prophecy. It's not the invention of, the prophetic news network, or what is his name from Detroit, the accordion player, whatever his name, the one I memorized. I used to go to all of his meetings. Jack Van Impe, he didn't invent this. Lindsay didn't invent it. Walver didn't invent it. God invented it. And we need to step back from prophecy, maybe one step back and not try and identify every toe and every wrinkle and every beast. I think that's the problem, that Christendom has been marked by this over focus and fixation on the minutia instead of stepping back and looking at the big picture. The big picture is prophecy is God telling us what he's going to do before he does it. And God says, you should trust the God who knows the future and does the future, instead of mocking and disparaging and saying God doesn't know the future, or we can't know the future. God says, just take my word for it. I'm going to do all this in the future. Whether you understand it or not, whether you get it right on your chart or not, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And that's what he's telling us in 48. But keep going to verse 17. Because there's a big finale to this. In Isaiah 48, verse 17, thus says the Lord, your Redeemer. So this one who from chapter 41 all the way through 48, for 7 chapters he's been talking about prophecy and that he is the God, the true God who speaks the future before it happens. He ends it by saying, thus says the Lord, verse 17, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. I am the Lord your God, who teaches you to prophet, who leads you by the way you should go. Oh, that you would heed my commandments. Then your peace should have been like a river, and your righteousness like the waves of the sea. Wow. See, the whole purpose of prophecy is not for us to become prophetic experts. That's another thing people do. They sit around and argue about this all the time. The purpose of prophecy in the first century was it got them so revved up to tell people about Christ, to live holy lives, expectant of his return at any moment. They were so prophetic, Paul thought Christ could come back in his lifetime. Now, he'd written most of the prophetic passages of the New Testament, and yet he's the one that thought it could happen at any moment. So what's the purpose of prophetic writings? To live holy lives, expecting Christ, living for eternity, not debating it. And see, the devil just has really messed the church up, and that's why the Reformer says, just get rid of the prophecy stuff. It's just too confusing. Just get rid of it. And that whole tradition has lasted for 500 years. But the purpose of prophecy was to authenticate who God is.